A ship like this can bring up to 5,000 visitors, like a ship of this size. So it really, puts into perspective the scale difference between the size of the town. We see that in the architecture, the local architecture that is inside the photograph. And we see that in relation to the size of the ship that's in the harbor. And we can also tell from this image, and it's almost a little bit awkward, that the ship almost looks like it's in the town. We almost don't see the sea, the body of water in which it's actually at birth in. So these issues, they're very close. Yeah, the image that we are seeing on the screen, okay, this was taken in Iceland in 2013. And I photographed this on one of my research trips when I was focusing on the Saga Age. This photo was not part of that project. It was we could call it a snapshot. I took it on medium format film when I went on like a tour of an island, and I was there to sort of learn about the history of that place. And because it was a touristic tour, I also got to see puffins, and that was the point for most people, was to go bird watching. And this one image sort of re-sparked my interest in tourism, that the topics that I was looking at earlier when, for example, when we're talking about recreational spaces, and also thinking about how Iceland or the North had become a new frontier for tourism. During the years that I was traveling there, so it began in 2011, and then this photo was taken in 2013, Iceland had been placed on the map. So people had heard about it because there was this massive eruption that happened with the volcanoes whose name nobody could pronounce. It disrupted air traffic, so it made it into international news. And there was a banking crisis in 2008. So there were all these different social or political factors or historical events that led to the tourism boom in Iceland. And I decided to go back to Iceland to start to investigate that more specifically. And I did that in the context of artist residencies. So artist residencies are an opportunity where you can live and work in another place. That's, it's not your home. It's not in your own studio. And you can spend more time and more focus on the particular thing that you want to learn about or you want to work on. And this is essentially how I ended up living in Iceland. It wasn't like a decision where I thought, okay, I'm just going to relocate. But it was after a few trips there and then 3 artist residencies of 1 month. Old fish factory came up for sale, like a decommissioned herring era factory. So a building that had been built in the 60s and was no longer being used for that purpose. It came up for sale, and my partner and I, we had the opportunity to purchase it. And since 2016, since the time that we took over this building, I have been mostly based in Iceland and working on a series or body of work, many projects that look at the tourism boom in Iceland.
It's fascinating. It's I love that how you got there. Residencies are a great way, but what made you fall in love with Iceland? What made you like? I know you're doing photography, you're doing the research, you're following the saga. Why stay?
Mm-hmm. In Iceland, I felt close to the landscape because I've always been, as a Canadian, someone that went out into nature. I'm not saying that all Canadians do that, but we are in a country that has huge amounts of wilderness. And since I was young, I was always somebody who was attracted to that. And I found that in Iceland. I found that wilderness, or let's not say wilderness, but we can say vast natural spaces. I found those to be very accessible, and I'm also more or less used to the climate. So the climate in Iceland is usually not something that people run towards. It's quite cold, it's very windy, it's very dark in winter and so on, but it's definitely not something that bothers me. I feel comfortable there. And in the particular community where I live, it's a small town called Seyðisfjörður. It's in the east coast of Iceland. It's a very artistic town. Many artists live there, and it's seen as a cultural hotspot. And so I found a community there as well. So it's not just about the landscape, but it's also about feeling a sense of belonging, or finding an environment or a milieu that you can connect with. So all those things kind of came together. Another factor is always personal. My partner is not Canadian. He's from Europe. And so it actually was quite convenient for us to find a home in Iceland, which is in between Europe and Canada. And he had also been living there for a few years previous. So both of us had an affinity for this place and felt comfortable to make a life there.
Let's keep diving into this. I love this image. I see your reflection on tourism in this image, because there's this beautiful waterfall, and then all of a sudden you see these little line of what looks like hundreds of tourists that are snaking into it, all trying to get a view or a shot for themselves. It's fascinating.
Yeah, so this is what I was looking at the beginning of this project. Like earlier in the project, I was traveling to particular sightseeing destinations, like I had with recreational spaces. But this time, however, I was focusing more on the human impact. There is not a lot of infrastructure in Iceland the way that we have in North America. We don't have, when I say we, I'm referring to us in Iceland. We don't have, we don't have like big, like divided highways, or we do have a lot of hotels now because of the tourism boom. But there aren't a lot of places or buildings at most of the tourist sites with that kind of infrastructure. So I was focusing less on the architecture and more on the human presence, like the human figure within the space. And over the course of several years, here I'll try to move to the next image. We should see two figures now. So these are two backpackers. Patrick, is that what you
I do,
see on
yeah.
your screen? Yeah. So during my process of photographing these places, I would start to encounter people and have conversations with them. Often it was me approaching them to ask questions about how they relate to the place or why they came to Iceland and so on. Sometimes people approach me because of the camera I'm using. So I'm definitely not inconspicuous as a photographer. I have this large camera that's on a tripod. And when I'm shooting, a lot of people are curious about, what exactly I'm doing. Am I making a photograph? And they ask a few questions about how it works. So this project led to a lot of conversations with tourists, with people who work in the tourism industry, and so on. So it slowly evolved to include portraiture. So and these are all what I would call mostly encounters with people. This image is taken in the town where I live. It's a bus that comes from Europe. So on the bus itself, it says hotelbus.pl. And it's because there actually is not a lot of accommodation in Iceland. So sometimes these buses are imported on the ferry along with the tourists, and then they travel around the country and they sleep in their own transportation. So I'm documenting the phenomenon in some way. I'll cycle through a few images so you understand kind of the scope of the project and the different types of visuals that were included. Here we have...
still see that step back. that step back. I just,
yes. Yeah, I'm employing that step back, but I also want to point out that I now avoid the elevated perspective. I've adopted what I call more of like the human point of view. So I'm staying grounded, at the same level as most other people. And I feel that this is a little bit more of a subjective way of looking at the topic rather than that objective observational approach that I was taking earlier in my work.
Yeah, it has a more personal feel to it for sure. Whereas the other one, that was a bird's eye view, almost like you're a helicopter checking it out, but now you're amongst it, and it's really nice.
Exactly. And then there's also this getting closer. So some images, they are pulled back. I called those more like the tableau style photographs, where you have like an entire scene composed within the frame. But then there's some images that really get in tighter. So closer to that hotel bus and closer to the people that I'm meeting, it towards more traditional form of portraiture. So in this image, we're seeing a portrait of a woman. She's sitting down. She's looking straight into the camera. Behind her, we see some kind of like school bus style, like a truck or a bus. It reminds us of a school bus, but it's not yellow, it's green. So there's some kind of hints here of like material culture, but we still don't know what's going on, where we are, who this person is. Are they tourists or are they somebody who works in the industry? So I'm combining all these different types of images and pictures of people to really just show what's involved in what's really happening in these spaces, who is involved, and also leave some room to talk about the issues that we encounter when we have a phenomenon that involves mass tourism in more natural, wild, or unpopulated areas such as Iceland. This image, Patrick, it's of a cruise ship. And this is also taken in the town where I live in Seyðisfjörður. The population there is 685 people. And it is a port community, which means we have like a deep sea harbor where large boats can enter. And historically, this has been an important ferry route. It's also a shipping route. It was significant during the fisheries, the cod era, the herring era. And nowadays, the port is mostly used to accommodate or to welcome cruise ships in the summertime. And this phenomenon had been rising continuously from the time that I purchased my own home there in 2016. And it hit its peak in 2019. And I think this photo might have been taken in 2018. So it's already kind of historically dated because we know that in 2018, this massive ship came to Seyðisfjörður. A ship like this can bring up to 5,000 visitors, like a ship of this size. So it really, puts into perspective the scale difference between the size of the town. We see that in the architecture, the local architecture that is inside the photograph. And we see that in relation to the size of the ship that's in the harbor. And we can also tell from this image, and it's almost a little bit awkward, that the ship almost looks like it's in the town. We almost don't see the sea, the body of water in which it's actually at birth in. So these issues, they're very close. I mean, they're in your face close. And there are some issues here about the invasion, so to speak, that happens when 5,000 people come to a small town with only 685 people, to welcome them, to host them, and create the space for them to have a day visit in a small Icelandic town. So with that
background and what you just said, the tension that is in this image is palpable. It makes a lot of sense, and it's almost, you have these three structures, these three buildings in the foreground, and then right in the mid level there, mid ground, you have this huge ship that's almost a city all on its own. It's almost like they transported a city and dropped it right in the middle of this small town and said, "Well, go have at it." It's just it's an amazing view. It's interesting when you look back at this project, and you're talking about 2016, and how does it make you feel when you look at these images?
Well, I was there. Yeah, exactly. I mean, how it makes me feel is, I connect it, of course, to the memory of the experience. I'm not seeing this as an image, not just as an image, but as an experience that I had, over like several years. So just referring back to that time specifically, the tourism boom reached its peak in 2018, like between 2016 and 2019 in Iceland. But the cruise industry was at its highest in 2019. And then we had the pandemic. So for me, this is really about like an era where something was like growing, mounting. For me, it was there was a tension there, of course. And I will like also make the link, like in terms of my way of looking at these landscape issues. It has changed with my relocation to Iceland because it becomes a little bit more personal. With Niagara Falls, for example, I don't live there. It's me going somewhere else for a short period of time, observing something, documenting it, and then sharing the ideas I have about it with other people in the world. One of the reasons why I wanted to live abroad is I wanted to experience the places that I was interested in photographing over longer periods of time. I wanted to become closer to the project, or I wanted my daily life to be less separate from the work that I was carrying out as a photographer or as a video maker. So for me, this work is quite personal. So you asked me, what do I see in this image? I remember like my experience, and I reflect on my feelings. And I think about how the photographs now, post-pandemic, become like a marker of that time. Like they're already historic photographs. And I photographed many cruise ships during this period, and some of them were put into retirement during COVID, meaning they were recycled or they were simply, broken up and disposed of. And now that the tourism industry is starting to grow again, that it was larger or more numerous in terms of ships in 2023 post-pandemic than it was in 2019. So it's had its rebirth, or it's in a new era of resurgence. I see these images as like just important reminders of how things are happening in the world and how they're related to things that are happening around the same time.